Gentlemen, what is happening? This is Divorce and Custody, our workshop. And this is part 5, where we're getting into some stuff about life after divorce. And it's intense. There's so much to this. I just want to tell you right now that in all of these, we've done 5, or this is the 5th seminar that we're doing online, and it is not enough. We need so much interaction on this to really get to a good spot with it. And there's so much going on. And what we're talking about in this one, which is so important, is we're talking about what I feel is the most important and the longest journey in this. Now, I know I've said that about a bunch of things, but they all kind of culminate into one. And there's a lot going on. So the first one, we had an introduction to divorce and what that entails. And that's a lot, guys. And I want you to understand that. And when you go through that first workshop, that's there. The second workshop, we go through the legal game. And actually, in a couple hours, I will be interviewing a divorce and custody attorney as well as a criminal attorney about a lot of the particulars. So I appreciate all you guys' questions and so on. I always stay active in it. And when I do these interviews, they're really important to me because, man, they help me out a lot. They help you guys out a lot. The legal game is so important. If you cripple yourself there, you're really causing a lot of problems in your life. The mental health road that we talk about, man, I think that is so important. And that is a foundation that you have to be walking. When we get then to life after divorce, there's so much to this. And like when you think about this, the long road of the legal process and gaining a good level of mental health and so on, very, very important. But man, this road afterwards that's going to go on for the rest of your life is so important. And it's something that, doesn't seem that important. It's not the emergency factor right away, but let me tell you, it's what's going to give you value to everything. So let's hop into this. Divorce and Custody Workshop 5. Life after divorce. The value of your hate. And this is something that I want to articulate to you that is going to be one of the most powerful things. Your hate, your contempt, your rage, your anger. And one of the things that is not specifically noted out here in a slide, but is in the first presentation I did and many other different videos that I've done, is that in our society and culture, we do not value men's anger, men's hate, men's rage, all these things we call toxic, and all these traits we pin down as this horrible thing. And they're not. They are misused, and they do get misused. And there is a toxicity that can be given to them or expressed in them. But that comes from us burying these things and not talking about them. That comes from us reacting to them. And we're going to get into this because your hate, all these things, your revenge, your feelings of pain, your feelings of depression, these things, if handled right, are going to be the most valuable thing to you. And that is what we're going to break down. And there's a lot to this. And this is one of those things where I really encourage you, if you want to go on this journey, to turn those things into good parts of your life, you have to take a few big steps. I'm going to hammer this in a lot in this video. All of the stuff in this, I expect that you do with a mental health professional or with a support group that is equipped to do that. Men's Development Excellence is equipped to do that. There are other support groups that are equipped to do that. I expect that you're involved in at least one of those or both of those things, and many of our members are included in both. So let's get to this first slide, the greatest phase of masculinity. This starts with hate. All right, pretty crazy, pretty bold statement, but it's a reality that's in so many men's lives and is very important. The first phase of a separation, you need the right support. You need a couple things, right? So when you're going through a divorce or a separation, you got to make sure you have your legal game squared away. You have to make sure your mental health taken care of, and you have to make sure you have a support system. Like, those are really important. Those are fundamental. If you don't have those, a lot of things can go wrong. And it's just a huge part of the process. And again, if you screw any of those things up, you really handicap yourself. And what I will also say is that when it comes down to the legal process and all of this, you can go wrong there. I've gone wrong there. 8 years ago or 9 years ago or whatever it is, I went totally wrong there and suffered a major legal consequence because of it. Yet I ended up well. Why? Because my mental health game was strong and I was able to repair those things and then walk that road afterwards, a little bit before too, and so on. And we'll hear more about this different road. But part 2 of this whole process is getting on that road less traveled, getting on the high road, getting on the road of a greater man, of men's excellence. So the first road is, and this is crazy. It's like, man, what can be harder than the legal process? What can be harder than beating my depression? What can be harder than getting to a spot where I can have my head above water? Is a road that is going to be longer, and it's going to be challenging, more challenging in different ways, or I don't want to say more, but to me it was, and to most other people it is, but it's just different. That's the only way to explain it. And that is what's going to give you all the values that are going to make your life good. So if you don't do this, that's how we tend to get stuck in that depression. That's how we tend to get stuck into that place where we're blaming and angry and into that toxicity of where men can go to, not in that political sense, but in the sense of not taking care of yourself. It's very, very important. Okay. So I want to also get to this, is that divorce is a rite of passage. You hear me say this all the time, but I want to talk specifically about what that means. So we've always heard in men's development, I think in my first seminar that I attended, which was a dating one, they talked about this very important thing that men don't go through a rite of passage. And then we had this guy who was, 20 or something like that, or 19 or, whatever, breaking down this important rite of passage that men don't go through in tribes in Africa and whatever. And this has been throughout human history, and Western civilization has taken it away. That's great that a guy could parrot that. I always thought that was interesting because I, for better or for worse, I lived a life where it's like, yeah, I didn't go through something where I was circumcised at 14. I didn't, I'm not Jewish, didn't have a bar mitzvah. I didn't do a traditional rite of passage. But by the time I was 26, 27, or whatever age I got involved in that sort of stuff, it was 28 actually, I had been through a fair amount of things where I chose, this is not good. In fact, when I was 17, I've had a drug problem since I was 14. At 17 was the first time I was like, okay, I submit. I'm done. And then I wasn't done. But I got, there was a true thing where I realized the magnitude of the life I had kind of carved out for myself and so on. So that's important to recognize. I just always thought that idea was kind of cheap and ignorant of how we blamed a lack of a rite of passage on our culture, why we couldn't be men. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you're going through a divorce or anything heavy in your life, any point of trauma, so it doesn't have to be divorce. It could be somebody passing away. It could be you finding out that you have a major problem or an autoimmune disorder. Maybe you got crippled, something like that. These are all rites of passage. And the reason what makes them rites of passage is because they're going to confront everything about you that you could be afraid of. You are going into the darkness. What did the Knights of the Round Table have to do? They had to walk through the forest on the path that was not built for them, or they had to make their own path. They had to forge their way. We had to go into the cave and be all alone with all of our demons or whatever. And these sort of metaphors talk about it. And we'll talk a little bit about why we go into metaphor. I also don't want to get into that because as legitimate as that is, that gets hijacked massively by the men's development industry and all these other cheap self-help type deals. But we need to go into the darkness and confront everything and come out, kill off what we have to, what isn't us, face what actually is us, and walk out with only us and know what that means. And that's very important. In a divorce, you're going to have that. You are going to confront things that you didn't remember were there. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is, because when it comes down to it, what is painful in our lives happens in unique ways. All right. Let's jump to here on this road less traveled. So the road less traveled is a slow road. It does not have anything attractive. It does not have anything cool. It is quiet. It is not flashy. It's nothing to brag about. It's something that we can never sell to anybody. And this alone is what makes it so masculine. Now, we could argue all day long about what is masculine and what isn't. And part of the thing to it is that it's so hard to define, but so clear to see. And part of that is also because it's unique and something that you need to walk on. If you are a man and you're seeking out masculinity, you will never be done walking that road of what masculinity is. And so when we go through what masculinity is and when we're seeking it, we are going to find different definitions and so on, but they tend to get quieter. They tend to get more stoic. They tend to get more determined and clear. They tend to not be flashy. They tend to have wisdom and so on. And these are the things that you will have to find for yourself. You know, I've always been an animated person. I've always been loud. I've always had all these different traits, but there's a masculinity that has developed and continues to develop with all of those traits that I have. And remember this, guys, on this road less traveled, this is truly one of the most selfless acts. We had one of the most selfless acts of fatherhood and giving yourself to a family and all these different things. And, you know, that may have ended out bad. And we hear a huge megaphone of masculinity saying we're victims and this sucks. And, you know, we got taken advantage of by women and we're going to change the courts and be angry forever. We're actually doing a selfless act now. Remember yesterday in the workshop, if you look at workshop 4, we talk about that this is now just for your family and it may not be with your family. Okay. So this is to be a great man, this is to be a great father and to have all those awesome moments, man. I like, especially at this time, such a good time with my kids, man. So great. So cool, man. And I always, I'm like, man, can I do this better? Can I do this better as we go through this? Can I be there more for them? So a couple disclaimers as we walk into this one. Number one, don't do this alone. I expect that if you do some of these exercises that we're going to talk about, and we're going to talk about the philosophy about them afterwards. And there's so many exercises you could do. These exercises, it's in a workshop. They're incomplete. These are meant to be done over years and they get more complex as time goes on. But do not do this alone. Specifically, I mean, do this with a mental health professional. At minimum, I expect that you're working with a therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, counselor, some mental health professional, or a support group that can handle this. This is not a Reddit forum. This is not people who are, you know, who we can allow are the BS of all the deep stuff that we're going to look at in this rite of passage as we go into the cave, as we do this thing alone and terrifying. We need to come back to reality and have a group. Very, very important. You need to be with a group that can handle that. Okay, that's very, very important for you to do that. And if you're like me or many people within my group, we do both. We get a mental health professional. And again, that's one of the most cost-effective routes to it all, of this whole process. And we work in a men's group, another super, in fact, more cost-effective oftentimes than mental health than that. And that really helps. That really helps a lot. Okay. So also in this, we will talk about some dark stuff. I'm going to tell you right now in this presentation, I may talk about some dark stuff, but written down, it's not so dark, but we're intended not to act. That these actions of what we're going to get into hate, we need to follow that path. We have to follow that path, but that doesn't mean we act on it. So specifically, you're not going to hurt anybody. You're not going to hurt your ex. You're not going to ruin her reputation. You're not going to kill anybody. You're not going to kill yourself. These are all things which will take you off the path. And I'm going to tell you this because I work with a lot of people who have criminal backgrounds, and sometimes you may have done that or these types of things. I don't want you to do that anymore. If you have done that, you can heal from it, and you can heal from it in a great way. But I am working with people who are not doing that, and that's very important. However, I will talk about being on that path and how we need to look at it. And man, we need to, if we have that in us, not everybody has that in it. Not everybody has the kill or murder thing or that sort of thing, the revenge, but we do need to process that. And again, that's why number one disclaimer, work with some good people. You do not need to be making decisions alone by yourself when going through highly traumatic stuff. Okay. So also disclaimer 3, stay active. The reason why yesterday we went through that 8-week plan is because I expect that if you're on this road, you don't just watch seminars, right? You actually get on it. And especially in these last 2 where we're talking about actions, I want you to take actions. You know, you don't get anything from watching this and going, oh, well, this could be done better, or, oh, well, this is not good, or what. Like, you need to be taking actions. It's very, very important. Okay. So stay active. This is why we're getting new hobbies. This is why we're getting into our bodies. This is why we're getting into our minds. This is why we're getting into support groups. This is why we're being social. This is why we're going back to our born to be qualities of how we heal ourselves. Very, very, very important, and really, really, you want to be doing that. Okay. So those are those 3 disclaimers. I expect that you're doing them. I expect that that's part of this. If you're not doing that, then really you're just being a bystander. You know, you're just watching this. This is meant to be done completely with those 3 disclaimers in mind. Okay. So now we get into the shadow. All right. So the shadow, this is a term to look at our dark side. And to me, it's overused, it's overplayed. People talk about shadow work all the time. They talk about the dark side. They talk about all this sort of stuff. And that's really, in the men's development or personal development, it's all self-help, is used right now to sell you. But the shadow was coined by Carl Jung. One thing I will say about having a good container around you is, if you read anything by Carl Jung, which is really hard to read, but if you watch YouTube videos and so on, if you research it more, what you're going to find is Carl Jung did go into that craziness. If you look at the Red Book, this was a lot of his journals and stuff that I do and many people in our group do and so on, is that we will journal about whatever, and crazy stuff comes out. It's okay. It's good. And one of the things that he always said was the reason why Nietzsche went crazy, or this was his theory, was because Nietzsche did not have a container to ground himself. So in the shadow, you are going to look at a lot of stuff. This is where your delusion may come out. This is where your hatred will come out. This is where all these different, very dark things come out. And when we talk about the shadow, it's not like, oh man, I got in touch with my anger. It's that you take the full ride of that anger. Oh, I got in touch with my kill. I got in touch with my murder. I got in touch with my suicide. I got in touch with all these things. You take that whole ride without taking action. How do you do that? That's crazy. So it's very difficult, and it's not something cheap. It's not something that you can fix in an online workshop. It's something that you can fix over years. And this is the journey that we're on. But the shadow is the gateway to the self. And in fact, if you look at like Carl Jung's layering, it's pretty awesome. I'm tremendously impressed by it every time I research it and study it, which is an endless thing. But when you get into it, it's layered, into the feminine, into the masculine. There's all sorts of different stuff. And then we finally, after many, many layers, you get to the self, or the ideal self, or the individuation, or the actualization of self. And this is like one of the goals, right? But what we are talking about here is a little bit more of a simplified version. But still, it's definitely intense, is that we want to go into the darker sides of us. Very important. So when we get to the darker sides of us, when we get to being, oh man, like in touch with the stuff that we hide, in touch with the stuff that we don't want to show anybody, in touch with the stuff that society tells us is wrong, in touch with the stuff that if we act out on it, it will end us, it will give us a bad life. It will end us up in jail, or put us in jail. It'll have all sorts of consequences. And so we want to look at those things and have a place where we can look at those things without causing damage. But there's a reason for that. And I want to get into this because, man, I had an excellent conversation with somebody yesterday. Actually, a couple people, later on at night and earlier in the day, right after I was actually done with our part 4 of this series, is the language of trauma. The language of trauma, most people don't speak. So most people may have trauma, but they don't speak the language of trauma. And this is very important. And this is why the shadow is so important. So divorce is trauma, okay? More than likely you've had trauma in your life before divorce. Trauma is just a deeply disturbing, distressing moment in your life. Now, I just want to articulate something here. In the language of trauma, trauma speaks in the abstract. And a lot of the times healing takes place in the abstract. And because of that, it attaches to everything. It's really crazy. I don't know the neuroscience behind it. And to be honest, in all my research with addiction, which is something that I deal with a lot, I've worked with people a lot professionally on addiction. One of the things about neuroscience, and whenever I talk to anybody involved in that, is it's all just the theory. But there's some damn good theories out there, and they do help progress the different process of healing and so on. So trauma happens, and because it's a disturbing and distressing moment, meaning it's an abnormal moment, our brain doesn't know how to process it. And our brain tries to process it. It tries to come up with logical explanations for it. But because of that, it usually infects multiple parts of our brain, and it digs up stuff which is from past traumas. So one of the things that we know from PTSD statistically is that people who have PTSD have had trauma in childhood. It's over 90% of people that show traits of post-traumatic stress disorder, which we talked about that a little bit, I believe in the first one, or no, in the third presentation, is that post-traumatic stress is normal, right? We're supposed to be stressed after trauma, but the continuation of that developing in the many different manifestations, whether that is not being able to sleep, there could be levels of distrust, detaching from society, paranoia, anger, all sorts of stuff that happens as that elongates, right? So in trauma, it is such an abstract thing that our brain tries to connect with it, and it usually includes all the different stuff from childhood that we had. Interesting, right? So if we get in touch with an aspect of the shadow, with our wife leaving us or us leaving her and feeling the guilt of it, whatever it is not working, we are confronted with a point of reality that is pain, that is unique and different and hits in many, many different places. And if we have past traumas, it can very easily dig those other ones up. So because it is abstract and in its language, it includes everything, or many other different things, not everything, but many things. And also the healing process is oftentimes abstract in that. Now, this is where I really want to tell you again, I expect that you are working with a mental health professional or a group that can facilitate this, because in the healing of that, it's not the same for everybody. Meaning my way of healing my trauma, I can almost guarantee will not be your way of healing your trauma. But your trauma being healed can 100% happen. You just need somebody to help navigate that. And it can get confusing and different turns in that road where it sprays off into 5 different areas. And you have to have somebody help you pick. And if you pick the wrong one, to reverse out of that and go to the right one. So healing trauma is not an event. It is a way of life. Okay, very important part on here. Healing trauma is going into the abstract, going into things which are undefinable and you cannot understand. This is also why the metaphor of going into the cave and going down the road is very important, because literally it is stuff that we cannot put our finger on, okay? Healing trauma is going to bring that abstract to reality, meaning that if we go like, oh my God, a lot of times like abuse can get uncovered in this. That may not be a reality, but that's something that's very common. We go through some sort of abandonment thing or whatever, and we uncover some abuse that we have forgotten about in our brain. That comes up. How do I live with that today? How do I go to work today? How do I keep a schedule? How do I do these things, which seem really simple? These things are, man, I was better off before I uncovered this trauma. Why would I ever want to uncover this trauma? And the reason why is because you will live free after that point. You will walk, you will live at 100% instead of at 50% you, 20% dealing with an emergency, and 30% dealing with this abstract stuff that you can't put your finger on and why you have bad relationships or whatever it is, right? So those types of things, why would you want to wake up? Why would you want to? So we need to bring that abstract back into reality. That takes time. That might take 2 weeks. That might take 6 months. That might pop up here and there throughout life, meaning like you might go through some sort of traumatic experience and then you find like, oh my God, there was this abuse thing. How do I have a relationship with that? How do I go to work with that? How do I talk to other people with that? And you'll figure it out. But this is why you need guidance. That abstract needs to be brought back to reality. Healing trauma is most likely going to bring up other traumas. All right? This is all good, but hard. One of the things that happened with me is when going through this, and so a lot of stuff has happened in my life, for better, for worse. A lot were stupid decisions by me, but a lot of those stupid decisions also had roots in early trauma. So one of the things was a lot of sex abuse and rape happening this was something where trauma had to be uncovered. And over time, 10 years later, whatever, it's like, oh, wait a minute. I'm going through this in terms of relationships and sex. How do I look at it? And it can be very difficult. So you have to be able to seek out that help with it. Past traumas can come up. It doesn't mean it's bad. It means that that thing was affecting you without knowing it, and not knowing, man, that's where we're at. That's why it's a rite of passage. You could go in that other direction. You can go in that other direction of ignoring it. And a lot of the times that does not end up good. It will never end up great. I'll tell you that. It's impossible if we just, man, screw it. I ain't ready to look at this. I get it. That may be okay. But if we continue on, it's just your full expression of self can never be had. And usually it gets a lot worse, but whatever. Okay. So I want to talk about the work. So the work is a self-help course that we have here at AMD, and it's within the MDX platform. It's also in its standalone platform. The work is something that is built out to do for years, and it's a very thorough program. I do that program in a very specific way. And I'm bringing this up because I think it's important for you, if you take this path without doing anything with my groups, which is fine, you need to understand how I work my groups. That is very important. So they go in 8-week segments. They cover different things like finances, like goals, like your shadow, like how to have relationships and so on. And they're very arduous. Now, the work is meant to be done, and how it is done is there's videos and PDFs, but you also do the work with calls with me on them, and we work very intensely on it. So that big thing is how we get to the shadow work and the dark side work and inventorying those things. So the exercises that we're about to do right now are from the work. This isn't just meant to be done in a webinar and go like, okay, I'm going to do this and go to a coffee shop and sit down and write it out. It would be done with me going it over with you, going it over with the group, having actions from that. And it's really just like a very small, it is the first draft of a blueprint of the direction that you're going to go. And believe me, in the work, we go way deeper. I mean, this is one exercise. We take this exercise and put it into actions and whole different discussions and other exercises in 8 weeks, all based off of rooted in this beginning exercise. So let's get to that. So we're going to start with resentments. Now, resentments is always a great place to start. If you've ever been in any 12-step recovery thing, that is usually tied to a 4th step. This is going to be a little bit different than that, but we're going to kind of start off in the same area. 4th step, an amazing tool. There's so many different ways to do it. I've done it in multiple ways. One that I'm still doing is probably going to take me years to complete because it's so awesome how I'm doing it. But I've done a couple, and but it starts off usually with your resentments. Man, I've done all of this. Thousands of people have done all of this. This is some good stuff. And again, remember, we want to have that container. We want to have people that we're talking to while doing it. And it's really good stuff. So we talk about our resentments. And here, our resentments can be people, places, or things. And I would encourage you to think of it on that level. I'm just going to make a list of the top 10 resentments for this particular exercise. Oftentimes, I might just say spend a month writing about all of your resentments. That's pretty thorough, but for this is a pretty big deep dive if we just go for our top 10 resentments. Now, these top 10 resentments don't have to do with your ex, but for this, presentation, this workshop, we're talking a lot about divorce. So in this, there's included in things which have nothing to do with divorce, but there are some. So the first resentment, and this is an example. We could do this in any way we want, but I prefer a list with a description of why we're angry at them. That would be the place to start. So we go with our ex-wife. We're going through a divorce and a separation. I've seen the worst sides of her. She has ruined my reputation, cost me tons of money while keeping my children away from me and lying to them. Pretty common map, right? That would be a reason to be angry and get into some darker sides of yourself, which are incomprehensible. Joe, he was a mutual friend of ours and is now dating my ex. Another common story, which is really hard to stomach, whether it was your friend, whether it was your coworker, whether it was a mutual friend, whether it wasn't even any of those, like that could really piss somebody off. Here we go with the Christian church. I was raised religiously and hated it. It is an emblem of control and manipulation. I had a crappy childhood with permanent problems from it. Now, these are all fictional. These have nothing to do with me, but the very common one, religion is big. My mother, I love my mother, but she makes me the most angry and uneasy. She's always nagging me and too much in my business. My father, he was never around when I was growing up. He has tried to show up in my life and come back in my life, but he's just self-centered and selfish. My boss, he is one of the unhappiest people I know. He's always angry and he does not know how to lead. He takes his anger and frustration out on me. My work, I'm good at it and I'm good at what I do, but I hate my company. They push their employees and pay them less. The company itself is flawed. I feel like I'm being used for my talents and doing wrong in the world. My sister, she's a self-centered bitch, and she always has been, always will be. Warren, he's my best friend. He also pisses me off in a huge way. He's conniving and untrustworthy. The government, they are corrupt from the top down. Both parties screw everybody, and they don't care about people and who they screw, and they're selfish bastards. Okay, so that's a pretty good list on resentments. It's not... if we get really deep with it, it can get really angry. I know sometimes my resentment lists are much worse than that, and sometimes they're much better. It depends where you're at in life, and resentments always change. So we want to be able to do that top 10, and we want to be able to do it thoroughly. One thing I did forget to add is this is a private list. You don't need to share it with anybody. Then what we're going to do is, even if we're doing calls together, you don't need to share it with me. All right, so that's how I work, and we navigated it in a pretty good way, okay? So what is your ideal self? So this next exercise, we're actually going to look at the self. We're going to look at who we are, and we're going to look at what our ideal is. And here I just wrote down a paragraph form. But one thing that I would say is spend some time with this. Spend a day to really think about it. Spend an hour, spend whatever to really think about what the ideal self is. And this description is too short. Now, in this description, this is interesting. So everybody does this differently. Everybody's road is so unique. But one thing that is consistent is that in this description and in the next exercise, because I just wrote these for the seminar teaching purpose, if you do the work or you do any of our courses, we'll go much more deep into this. But we often, the longer we write, the more comes out about what our ideal actually is. So again, ideals we don't talk about in society in depth. We know what they are. We talk about them. We have all sorts of causes and whatever around our ideals, but we don't actually explore them deeply. So once again, that is in the abstract because it's uncommon. We all know it. We can point it out. It's kind of like masculinity. We can all see what masculinity is, but to define it is very difficult, right? Because it's an individual path, because there's a lot of things that we don't give specifics to, and when we do, we tend to screw them up. Some things are meant to be left in the abstract. So our ideal is there as well. So the more we write about it, the more we see this weird thing we can't put our finger on, but we do value greatly. So very important. When we write about the ideal self, the more that we can put down, the better. But this should be how you see your life, how you see your values, how you see other people. This is just a write-up on the ideal self. And the more time you spend with it, the better. The next is the dark side that we're going to write down, and we're going to write down our dark side. Now, this can be bad, and you want to be careful with this because you don't want to incriminate yourself. Write it down on pen and paper, and you could even burn it afterwards or destroy it or those types of things. So when we get to our dark side, we want to write about all the things that are inappropriate. And we do not know how to do this in our society because we have an image of what the dark side is. We have a way that we can maybe share our dark side with the public or with a select group of people, but very rarely do we look at our dark side in its specifics. So we're actually going to write about that and do the best we can. And maybe we spend a day on this. Once again, I say even here, I expect that you're working with a mental health professional or a support group that can handle this, or both. And many of the guys in my group do both. So we explore our dark side and we get into it. And in this example, it's not so bad, but oftentimes dark sides could have things which are highly criminal, whether you've done them or thought them. They have a lot to do with sex because we don't talk about it in society. They have a lot to do with anger. They have a lot to do with everything that we repress that is human. All right. So we repress a lot of very human things like our anger. We're judged in society for that, like our sex, like our different kinky things. One thing that's super common, which comes up in sex and a lot of people don't talk about, is that people who are heterosexual will look at homosexual stuff. They will look at transsexual stuff. They'll look at things that have abuse. They'll look at things that have abduction. They'll look at pornography that could be illegal and so on, or have the draw to do those things. That is fine to put down in here. I'm not going to ask you to read it. I'm not going to or to share it with anybody. If you are working with a therapist or a support group, you can privately talk about that with certain people in the group, or at least that's how we do it. It's not good to repress anything. And when you are writing about this stuff, it is good to write about. I will also say when it comes down to violence, and something that masculinity is frowned upon big time, is a lot of times when we go through the steps of violence, we feel a lot. I've had violence in my life, whether I've done it to other people, done to me, and so on. But the specifics of that has certain traits that I may have liked, that I want to hide, that I want to, not share with other people. When we go through that, we might like something, really common. We might like part of it. But it's bad. We don't want to talk about it. We're told culturally that we shouldn't talk about it. We shouldn't offend people with it. But when you ever get people together talking about it, man, it can go into a good spot. I always hate it. Like if you get a support group, whether that's for vets or for drug addicts or whatever, dealing with violence, and we just stay in the story of it. Oh, that's good. I like it. We just stay in the story of it. Oh my God, this, and then they were doing that. And then this happened. Oh, dude, and we find these commonalities, things that we were never able to talk about before. But if it doesn't evolve past that into what that means to us, how that shaped our decisions, a good example of this would be like stealing from somebody and then helping them look for it later. We hear that cliche in recovery a lot of times, but in actually doing that, man, it's such a ego, like boostering thing when we're doing that. It's also something which is like we could have a lot of pride around, but we also have guilt and shame around it, which is very bad and so on. So we want to really, really look at these things in depth. We want to look at all of that stuff. And again, have somebody around. The ideals aren't actually easy, but the ideals are something that they're easier for us to write about and get to know. As we get into the shadow or the dark side, that can be really difficult. And we want to have people around us then helping us guide us or talk about it. Or it's like, I could talk about my stories with it. I don't need to know about yours, but that might encourage you to go deeper, or how we go deeper. Okay, so now what we want to do is we want to take that list out. We want to take the list out of our top 10 resentments, okay? And we want to write down our dark side. I recommend to do the dark side first, of what our dark side would tell us to do in that situation. And then later on, the ideal, what we would do in that situation. So I didn't do it for all of these. I just did the examples for the first three. And the reason why we want to end with our ideals, or do the ideals last, is because we want to end on a good note. It can be disheartening to end on a bad note. Now, so what would your dark side do to this person? What would your ideal do to this person? Now, I just also want to say that if you're doing this exercise, I really encourage you, man, be around some people. It is incomplete if you don't do it this way. And if you don't want to do it, well, I think you should, but if you don't want to do it, I side with that if you're not going to do it completely. So here I wrote down some light dark side stuff of my ex-wife. If it was possible, I would make her broke. I would screw up her sex life and whatever, in whatever way possible, and make her feel pain and loneliness that I feel. I don't want to deal with her. I'd just rather her go away forever. Joe, if I were to be honest, I wish you would disappear completely. The Christian church, you can wipe it off the map. For those dark side things, we need to understand that in that there are people that are going to think much darker stuff than that. Okay. Including myself, if I were to go there, if you think about like people who've wronged you, there are times where I'd want to kill them. I'd want to torture them. Like I said, there's like, we'll talk about this a little bit more in the slides down below. And I would encourage you, if you're watching this, really watch towards the end, because a lot more of this will make sense as we tie it all together. If you've had more trauma in your life, you're going to go deeper with it. Your threshold of pain, your threshold of giving pain, your threshold of taking pain, your threshold of poor consequences is all going to be higher. Okay. So that's something that we see a lot with people who have trauma in their life. So it might be like, man, I hate this person, or this person had sex with my ex and now they're dating them or something. Like, man, I fucking want to kill him. I want to torture him. I want to torture him because I had torture done to me and that was painful. And my way of showing pain is that. Okay. So very important that we have good people around us as we write deeply and honestly about what our dark side would do. It's just straight up, the Christian church, can go to hell or whatever. And that's not my belief or anything like that, but very common for religion or government or, the liberals or the conservatives or whatever, that have this huge window of hatred, right? Or resentment that we have. What would you want to do? What would you want to do to those things? What is your fantasy? What are those things? And it's interesting because what are those things as an individual? Right now in the history of the United States, we had some people attempt that. And this has been attempted over and over again, but we did it as a group. And whatever the political leaning of that is, that's one thing. But as the individual process of why that's wrong and the relationship with the government and all this sort of stuff, man, that's what you really want to get to. And just to put things in perspective, 15 years ago, I did this documentary, which I'm now going through the tapes. I never put them up. I never edited it. And now I'm looking at editing all those things and putting them up. But the more valuable thing of that thing is that 15 years ago, I had a son. And so as a baby, so cool to see. And then I'm doing this documentary stuff. I'm trying to get clean and sober. It's a really interesting window of my life of what I'm doing. And I see people saying the same things of that they're upset about it. But 15 years ago, some of those people have also changed because I still know them, and their path to that is how did they individually solve those problems? We've always had a problem with government or with politics, and that's important and it's not to be ignored, but there was a personal process which came about in the perhaps never-ending impossible solution to the cause that they were attached to. It was a real interesting thing. And not to take away from that cause. That cause is important. But what became more important were the solutions that they found in themselves to build in their own lives. So we want to look at the individual road to what our dark side would do. Now we get to the ideal side. And some of the ideal side, especially if we come to government or whatever, it might be to go have a rebellion or something like that. So we want to look at what those ideals are, okay? So with the ex-wife, maybe the ideals that we have, and we'll talk about this in the next slide, maybe the ideals that we have are forgiveness, or I want the best for her. I want to see her as sharing the best moments of my life, but then it ended, and it's very painful, and it hurts, and so on. With our best friend. I do want to cut ties with him, or maybe it wasn't the best. I forget how I wrote it in here. But the dude who's now dating our ex, I don't know why he did it. Maybe it was best for him. I'm angry and I just want to get past it. That's what the ideal side tells me to do. The Christian church, well, look, it helps a lot of people. It hurts people too. I need to move past this and live my life. Maybe that's what the ideal side is doing. Now, this is never simple. Never simple. And anything that I'm going to do on this, it's not going to be simple because I don't see people healing in that way from it. And I wish I was wrong. I could be wrong. I don't know. But I just don't see simple, quick fixes ever to deep trauma as much as a lot of people sell that as. So working through the dark side and the ideal, I want to just say this is unique to every person. This is so different. How someone's dark side might go to revenge is a different road, and every road is different in its individual, but it's a different grouping of that road. It's a different generality than somebody whose dark side is resentful and maybe just contemptuous, or maybe jealous, or maybe envious. Our dark sides are going to take on different flavors. And at some point, you're going to see they get kind of consistent. There's 3 or 4 roads that people go dark in, maybe a little bit more than that. And those groupings have different directions and healing paths with them. So with ultra violent people, with ultra resentful people, I'm good with. That's something that was somehow given to me. And I'll say this, I don't want to challenge that. I don't want you to make it a competition and go, oh, well, man, Steve, I'm really ultra violent. I've done this. Okay, maybe that's not my thing. I always think it's funny when I talk to people who go into psychology, and oftentimes you'll get people, they go into psychology and then they say, I want to work with abused kids and I want to work with the most traumatized people. And I don't work with the most traumatized people, but I work with some pretty traumatized people, and I'll just share some stories and they're like, oh, no, not that. Just general abuse, not incest and, really effed up different things and kidnappings and so on. Anyway, when oftentimes people hear the realities of that, they get to a point where they're just in over their head with a lot of those different things. It's always an interesting thing, but they take on different directions. So certain abuse moves in certain ways, certain pain moves in certain ways, certain traumas move in certain ways. So we need to understand that. And then we also need to understand that our ideals do the same thing. So when we work through our ideals, oftentimes those ideals might be forgiveness. So they might be guilt motivated. Okay. Oftentimes those ideals can deal with, wanting to just walk away and perhaps take the high road with it, which has some flaws in it, perhaps. It might be dealing with it in a way where they want to face it in all these different ways. So ideals and dark sides have unique paths that we need to also understand. And this is why you need to work with professionals on this. And it's so good. It's so good when you can get through this. It's an amazing thing. I encourage everybody to take the long, slow, high road on this, because it makes your life better. So then we get into relationships to the ideal. So this is our relationships to how we see the ideal. And let me actually reverse here. I missed a little part. I'm sorry. I give you an example of this in terms of the truth. Okay. So when we're working with our dark side and we're working with our ideal, we jump to ideals that can be beacons and lighthouses and so on for what our ideal stands for. And truth is an easy one. So truth is something that we can all get behind. Almost everybody agrees that the truth is good. It's something that we can believe in, we can stand for, and we can all kind of understand what it means. Yet what's interesting is when it comes down to our interpretations of the truth. Man, that sounds so weird, right? It's like, how do you interpret it? The truth cannot be argued. But we find people on opposite sides of the spectrum, both saying they represent the truth, and they are literally foes with each other, right? Their reality of the truth, is different, or there's different expressions of it, okay? So our relationship to the ideal is going to be unique, and that is very important. So our relationship to how we see our dark side, how we see our ideal side is our own. All right. And oftentimes we're trying to impose that on other people, usually because we want to share it with other people, because we value it, but we need to understand that this is our own, right? And so if we really explore this, most people, the truth means what is true. It is reality, and it is simply that, and it makes perfect sense. However, this is going to be different for somebody who likes the truth because they were lied to, that lie hurt them, and they want reality. Now, that version might mean that they want justice, they want to show people what's right, they want blah, 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 like all this sort of stuff. Truth is also going to be something different to nobody who's really experienced the negativity of a lie. It's going to then take on, well, it's logical. It makes sense. Everybody wants this. And why can't we do it? So I can just then logically explain to people with the right information, and information is key, and they will get the truth. That's going to be their expression of how the truth manifests. And all of these are right. They're all right. It's important to see where somebody is at on the road. Another version of the truth might be somebody who lied and was a person who did not, really share good ideals or whatever. And in their expression of the truth, they are somebody who comes back from lying and finds the truth. And they're going to value that in a different way. And it's interesting. This all goes in different areas, right? So if I'm somebody that was dishonest and lied, cheated, and stole for a lot of my life, and I find the value of the truth, I'm going to have one look at it. If I'm somebody that gets burned and screwed over by people because they lied, I'm going to have another way of looking at it. If I'm somebody that just is on the outside and I'm detached from that person's personal experience, I'm going to have another version of it. If I just tell people about it, they'll be fine. So that's interesting. Now, if I'm somebody that, let's say, lied, cheated, and stole, and then I get lied to, I can have both. It's weird. I might revert back and forth. And usually in our lives, this experience is going to move through everything. And man, it gets so crazy. What does this have to do with what I'm talking about? Okay. This has to do with the immature masculine and the mature masculine. And I just want to put right out there right now, I've talked about a lot of the immature masculine, but every mature masculine person or somebody who takes on a trait of masculinity in a mature way got there through being an immature masculine or being immature about that trait. Here's the other thing. You are never done with this road. Never. That if you are in the mature level to it all, you're going to have your immaturity come out. Much like truth, an amazing thing. Truth, depending on how you see its source, but I believe truth's source comes out of human choice. It's not necessarily something in nature, because nature, which just has reality, doesn't have a counter. Nature does not lie to you. Only I can lie to you about that nature. But this is a weird, philosophical thing of where I say its root point is, could be wrong, whatever. I'm only so smart. I'm not, everybody has their different opinion on this, but when I move into that sort of truth, right? And I see it as a man-made definition so that we can view things better and share with each other more. Man, if I get lied to, the immature comes out. If I get misrepresented, the immature comes out. And the immature almost always comes out in things like blame and things like revenge and things like the dark side being leveraged and all these different things. And what's interesting about the dark side is we do not want to completely destroy and repress the dark side. We're not at war with it. We want to integrate the dark side, meaning everything dark within us, we also need to recognize is a part of us. Again, man, this is too much stuff for one singular short workshop, right? Like, we need to workshop this quite a bit, but the immature is going to react in all these different ways, right? Right. The immature is going to do a bunch of different stuff. All right. So in that road of the immature, we have to be on it to get the value of the mature. Now, an extreme example of that when it comes to truth is lying, cheating, and stealing and being beaten down and then choosing, okay, I'm going to redeem myself and get better. But a less extreme example of that is like, maybe we get some cash register dishonesty, meaning like somebody gives us $5 too much and we take it and then we realize like, that didn't really benefit our lives. And we go, man, you know what? I don't want to live that way. But we then value the truth more. We then value the reason and need for the truth more. Or we lied to somebody or got lied to, and we make some peace with that. And that gives us the value of that ideal. And so ideals have to be worked. They're not as simple as a definition. They're not as simple as us taking a step back and just having more information on it. More information is better, but our experience and relationship to it is very, very important. It's huge. And that's where we get trapped in the immature. and we can move to the mature. The mature is understanding, and what I will say is giving compassion to our ideas. So we're going to take the spiritual principle, or perhaps the ideal of compassion, and I want to work it towards my anger, right? Oh, well, I'm angry for a reason. Let me understand it. Let me dive deep into my anger. Let me dive deeper into my shadow. Let me look into it. Let me care about it. Let me see how it's going to allow me to screw up so I can get into myself and build love for myself, which can generate love for others and all this sort of stuff, right? And it's sad because these things get hijacked by self-help, a bunch of woo-woo stuff that goes incomplete when it is a tremendously amazing journey that we're on. All right. So our ideals have to be worked. I want to get back to hate because, man, my life has been so much about hate. Actually, I don't think this is an interesting story. I wish I had a copy of it. I think I still might. It was on a VHS tape. I got to digitally transfer that because that degrades and it's probably 25 years old at this point. But I made a film about this, and it was, when I was 21 or something like that. It had a famous person in it, actually, a famous graffiti artist. So in that whole thing, it was about the hate. It's like, how do I show this? How do I show the hate? How do I show the suffering and into the ideal and into the beauty and all these different things? It's always been kind of a thing for me. So even when I was pretty lost and crazy, that was, man, I really wish I had that. I remember I showed it to my friend who was made films, and he was like, oh yeah, cool. And I was like, oh man, it sucks. He wasn't that impressed. And he was like, no, man, it's good. It's just, I do this for a living. And I was like, oh man, terrible. It was heartbreaking for me. Anyway, so, and also we watched it on a monitor where you could see the edits. And back then you did linear editing, or at least on videotape, whatever. They always had non-linear. You guys don't care about that stuff. Okay. So when it comes to divorce, we are going to feel some things when we have the abstract. We're going to have trauma because we weren't expecting this, right? We weren't expecting this to happen, of extreme distress and duress that's coming out of nowhere, that gives us hate, that gives us anger, that gives us depression, that gives us contempt, that gives us the desire to kill, the desire for justice, the desire to do anything for that, suicidal thoughts, depression, and so on. And there could be ideals attached to all of those things of why they're justified. And we always hear it all day long from divorced men. Man, I really hope you hear this, that a divorced man, if he is going to take his own life, which is not good, and you need to see a therapist and you need to work with somebody, and that is not the answer. It is not it. But you're not going to hear that right now, because what you're going to hear is, no, this is what's best, is that I am in pain. I want to get out of pain. It hurts, but this is the best thing for my family because I have guilt and so on. And we can't see past it. Keep listening. Don't act on it. Don't act on it. But that is a chain of thought that we deny men from being able to talk about. And that is common enough to call it normal, in the sense that when we're going through divorce, we're all mentally unhealthy. Nothing is normal, but that's normal for that situation because there's so much going on. We may have the desire to kill. We may have that desire to go, man, I want to murder this person. I want to, torture them or whatever stuff. We may have that. And that is important to go through it, because if we deny that of a person, we repress it. And that person attaches an ideal to that. No, I want to kill them because that is what's right. That's what a man does for his family. It's the most primal thing I can do. And I feel it, man. Like, who am I if I don't do that? I am weak if I don't do that. I stand for strength. I stand for power. I stand for all these things. This is the ideal that goes to it. And man, we need to have a discussion about that brings people into the greatness of what a man can be, because this can be great. And I'm telling you, it can be. Don't do it. Don't act on it, but I will walk you through it. And that's so important. And it's more than just going, you have a voice to say you're going to kill somebody or whatever. No, you need to understand the meaning of that. You need to get in touch with your ideal, your primal urge, and why that's important without acting on it. You need that. Because in that shadow, you need to make your own light of what this means. And I can't speak to this passionately enough. Man, I have a lot of experience with working with people on this, and I want you to know that what you're feeling, if you're feeling those things like suicide, depression, killing, revenge, torture, all these things, I get the ideals that are attached to them. There is a nobility, but we cannot act. We cannot pigeonhole ourselves in a spot where we have major social consequences ending us up in prison, carrying on the trauma and abuse and giving it to somebody else, this abstract thing of confusion to our kids, so they end up confused and can't make sense out of it and learn the progression of what abuse and trauma does, which I've talked about in the mental health thing, as well as we'll talk about it a little bit more. But we must walk that, and that is important. There's nobility in an ideal that is always going to be attached to the pain that you feel, to your shadow that you feel right now. Your dark side needs to be respected. I want to jump to this really quick. A long time ago, this actually came from a lawsuit, I came up with a clear distinction as how somebody attacks you is what they fear most to be attacked with. Now, this isn't always true, but the more a person is hateful, the more trauma a person has, and the more a person cannot manage their own emotions, that they're going to be reactive. They're going to jump to the immature. They're going to be on that lane. And again, the way we get to the mature is through being immature, but we have to do it right. And if there's a lot of trauma and a lot of pain, that immature is going to be real loud and obnoxious, right? So how somebody attacks you is what they're going to, what they attack you with is what they fear most to be attacked with. So that's interesting, right? So when somebody is really angry and they attack your reputation, well, that's because they fear their reputation being hurt. Now, in a tactical sense, in a lawsuit or something, you can use this to navigate yourself pretty well. You can see like what's going to stop them, what's going to hit a blunt object, what's going to keep them fighting. Usually if they start off a fight in that way, they're usually to fight longer and harder than you with it. But if you can be smarter, there's all sorts of stupid stuff, right? That could have advantage if you're dealing with a good lawyer who can structure all this sort of stuff. And when we get into the meta and the psychological part of it, it gets pretty crazy. So check this out. A child who is humiliated by his parents is going to humiliate somebody when they're hurt. If that child has a lot of trauma and they get creative with it, they could even be a really stupid person. They will get better and better at humiliation. And that pain never dies, it continues. And so that's how it progresses, is that they get better with it. They start to humiliate their friends. They get in points where they can hurt their friends or enemies or whatever and humiliate them. But we only really hurt the people that we love, right? In their relationships, they'll do that and it won't stop. And maybe their mom or their dad or whatever, hit them, made them feel alone, made them feel isolated. Maybe they tortured them, maybe all this sort of stuff. So then the justification for that humiliation will also be bigger because remember, trauma happens in the abstract. We sort it out in the abstract. So abuse, when you're talking to people who've abused, could have happened every day. Could have just happened 2 times. Could have just happened 10 times, but they won't be able to tell you how many times they were abused. It seems like it was every day. When we take that and we take to somebody who is imposing their pain upon you, and we get another thing. People start making up justifications for their abuse. People start getting dramatic with it because it's painful and it's hard. And we see this over and over again culturally when we see men get abused in some way or taken advantage of. It's the emblem of victimhood. To be a victim is a very important process to go through, but it does not mean that you stay in that. But one of those things that we see is we see people manufacturing their trauma. Their trauma becomes a competition. It becomes bigger and bigger and all this different stuff. And we see that because people are not able to process their pain. Now, if they attack somebody, they're going to attack somebody in the way that they know they've been hurt most. This is why the more resentful they are, the more angry they are, all this sort of stuff. They're going to go in that direction. So why is this valuable to you? And why are we exploring the shadow? And the reason why that's important is because how we hate somebody, and remember in that list that we came up with of what we're going to do to somebody, right? What our shadow is telling us what to do, it is going to show us. It is going to show us where we are hurt. All right. And this goes back to our ideals, because remember, for our shadow, we have an ideal. I am going to kill myself, or I'm going to seek revenge. I'm going to do whatever because it has a noble cause of strength, of letting my family go, of doing all this sort of stuff, of doing what's best for them because I'm what's worse for them, whatever type stuff we have. And I don't want to write that off. I want to talk to you about it. But that is our ideal that we give our dark side. Okay. We got to explore it. This might sound complex, but if you work through it and you work through it step by step, it will be very, very clear. So we need to give the ideal to our dark side. And look what that is. We need to honor that. We can't shut it up. We can't shut it up or it becomes the abused kid. It becomes the angry kid. It becomes the kid who lights stuff on fire. It becomes the kid who tortures animals. It becomes the kid who acts out erratically. It becomes the kid who misinterprets power and finds it in the ways that he can get it instead of the ways where it is given to him because he's earned it. Very interesting. Like, how are we seeking power? What does the manosphere say about power? It says, get it. It says, go for it. A lot of people who have power say that, but it's a nuanced thing. It's a very wise thing that we need to go for. Very interesting. So we have this saying that happens in our groups that says, pain shows us where the problem is, but it doesn't show us the solution. Pain shows us where the problem is. The problem is my relationship with my ex and my kids because she's a bitch, right? And we get caught up in the specifics of that. We get caught up in the noble cause to our shadow for that. We get caught up in the action that we have to do. But there's an interesting thing here because pain shows us where the problem is, but it doesn't show us the solution, meaning the solution, the ideal, is so abstract. Why would we look for compassion with our ex? But see, this equation goes differently, and it's an equation of the abstract, so it's kind of crazy. But the equation is simple. Pain shows us to go to the opposite of pain. That's the solution. Pain shows us to go to the opposite of the pain. The action assigned to going to the opposite of the pain, well, what is the opposite of that? That is the ideal. All right, so that is this crazy, bizarre equation that we go to find the ideal that we must work. But let's really think of this. To really, really think about this, that means that our pain shows us we want to kill and hurt somebody. What is the opposite of that action of killing and hurting somebody? Perhaps compassion in a unique way. Perhaps love in a unique way. Perhaps those things in a unique way. But we cannot find that ideal, that principle, which is going to save our ass if we do not look at the action of that. And I'm not telling you to take the action of killing somebody or harming somebody. I'm telling you that you have to explore that action to understand why that ideal is important. And that's great on paper. That's great to remember when we get to the ideals of the person that goes like, oh yeah, well, the truth, it just makes sense. So all we need is more information. And let me just show you this scale of pros and cons and you're going to get the truth. You need to understand the actions of the lie. You need to understand the actions of fighting for the truth. You need to understand the actions of redemption from the lie. You need to understand the actions of justice. You need to understand that by living it. And always having that ideal saying, hey, I'll guide you on that way. Specifically to divorce. I'm depressed. I want to kill myself. I'm useless to my family. I've done nothing. They're better off without me. She already has the kids. I can't make any money. I have no purpose. I have pain. I can't get past this pain. I'm thinking about stuff in my childhood that can't be resolved, and I cannot touch it. Die. I need to die. And don't take that action. But we need to talk about this. And this is a pride of masculinity that I want to show you and guide you through. This is something that is so goddamn important that we ignore as men and we won't talk about, and we mire it down with this stupid, immature crap in masculinity, just saying to be tough, or that do the opposite of your pain, or that you were shit on and bullied, so now bully somebody else or be strong and powerful. That is not what we do. We need to go, what is the action of that pain? Why do I hate myself? Why do I want to die? Why do I sit here and not have any solutions or answers for my life? Why is that happening? What does that mean? And there's something here that is saying self-love that we cannot see until we are here in that moment of pain and in trauma where we can walk through it. And this is where you have to say, hey, I am going into the darkness. I am sitting in the cave. I am walking down the road. I'm walking down the path that has no light, that has nothing in front of me, but I'm taking steps. Hold my hand. Support group, therapist, psychologist, psychiatrist, hold my hand. When I come back, And I get so scared, I run back. I need somebody to come back to. And that is important. You may not understand it now. Why is self-love important? You're going to get it from walking back on that road. When you want to kill somebody, when you want to hurt them, when you want to torture them, when you want to, whatever it is, abduct somebody and make them feel the pain that you feel, right? And this may not be your genre of pain, but with guys who have high trauma, PTSD, or violence in their past, it's going to be things. I may want to sexually assault somebody. I want to deface somebody. I want to do the movie Seven to everybody in every single different way, or whatever it is, right? I want to do that. Well, what does that mean? Am I afraid to go there? It's in you. And I really invite you to look at it, because the equation is there's pain. It's telling you to do an action which is based off of its opposite, but the opposite of that action is the principle that you need to learn. And the value of masculinity is there. And I truly believe that the rite of passage, if you have pain, if you're coming to this and you have pain as an adult, if you have pain through a divorce, you're going to have certain pains which are beyond what you can imagine. And to gain the principles of masculinity beyond that are massive. They are massive. And why would you let that go? Every time I have an addict that kills himself in front of his family, that turns to a life of prostitution and pain and suicide, or gets abducted and killed, and all these things that have happened to my friends, all these things that I've seen, or somebody that goes through divorce and they can't take it. Or one of the things my ex-wife said, she said, man, all these people, they're killing themselves that I know. These husbands are killing themselves. Why? Because so few people lead them through this pain. And it takes a lot. It's not in an ebook. It's not in a workshop. It's not in whatever. It's not in any of this stuff. This is only to help you. And so this is what I invite you guys to do. I invite you guys to walk through this pain. You can do it with me. You can do it with somebody else. There's plenty of people equipped for it. The story of man is millennia long. It is so long. In every religion we talk about this. In every myth we talk about this. But walk it. Don't just talk about it. Don't just theorize about what Joseph Campbell said and look at the hero's journey and go, oh man, I'm about to get to the riches. Work for that. You need to be confronted with it, and it's so important. And this is what I stand for. This is where Austin Men's Development could be a doorway to you. But the tool specifically that I made for this that works is Men's Development Excellence, is taking you through this, taking you on this journey. And it's so important for you to be able to do this. The greatness of being a man, the ideal, all these things that you live by, honesty, open-mindedness, willingness, compassion, truth, virtues of man that we know and we chase, they're all something that are not just learned about, that are not just talked about. They're not cheaply done by anybody. They require the great leverage, the great crowbar, the great threshold, the great door opening of pain to get you there to find it. And that's where we need to stop this megaphone of blame, of anger, of revenge, so that we can get in a crowd so that we don't see our individual relationship with it. We need to realize that the specifics, if we only look at that, my ex left me, my ex took the kids away from me, my ex put claims against me, we are trapping ourselves in a place where we cannot evolve past. And the evolution of man is great. And it becomes a greater man than he could have ever imagined to be post-divorce, post a rite of passage, and turn it into that. That's it, guys. Links are down below. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you come by the Austin Men's Development Board where we live broadcasted this whole entire thing. Download the slides. They're done for you. But most importantly, get to work on this. If you're in a legal battle, get to work on it. Don't let it fall short. You will always thank yourself for fighting harder for your kids, but you don't fight harder for your kids to be an asshole to your ex. You fight harder. It may start there. Remember, we all start in the same place. You fight harder for your kids because you are their dad. And to know the depth of that, you need to keep your mental health in check. You need to do whatever you can to be your best self. You need to do whatever you can so that you do not handicap yourself in terms of mentality, finances, health. You need to do everything that you can to turn into the best man because they will need you. And if there was any trauma from this, because life is going to give them trauma anyway, they will need your help and you need to be there for them. And that is important. Man, live a great life. Don't base it off of guilt. Don't base it off of shame. Base it off of expression. Base it off of who you are and base it off of masculinity because you were born to be a great man and it's already within you. All you need to do is find it. And this is a tool for that. So thank you very much. We will talk to you guys soon.